Welcome into this sacred space of three spiritual besties. Grab a seat and join us for raw and unfiltered conscious conversations. Hello and welcome to today's episode of Conscious Conversations. In today's episode, we dive into the shadow. To not overcomplicate what we mean by the shadow self, it's better known as the process of exploring and understanding the hidden or ignored parts of ourselves, like the thoughts, feelings, and traits we've repressed and pushed aside. In our spiritual growth and healing, shadow work is significant because it helps us to confront and heal past wounds, limiting beliefs, and unresolved traumas. By bringing awareness to these elements of ourselves and accepting them, we can oftentimes achieve greater self-awareness, deepen our understanding of peace and our true authenticity. It helps us to release old patterns of behavior that often place limitations on our personal growth and evolution. The goal of shadow work is to bring hidden or suppressed aspects into conscious awareness so that they can be understood, accepted, and transformed. It often involves confronting uncomfortable truths about oneself and can require introspection, journaling, and or working with a therapist to help heal and integrate these aspects of self. This is a deep transformative journey into the hidden parts of ourselves that shape our actions, beliefs, and relationships in our everyday life. Girls, I want to ask you, I give a brief description of what I believe the shadow to be and how I've worked within the shadow. So I want to know, what does the shadow mean to you guys, and how has it introduced itself to you within your own personal practice? I feel like I'm kind of in this current spot of learning, just beginning my shadow work journey consciously. And what I've been learning is that it's very much, in a sense, blocks that have been created and formed throughout my life that are preventing me from meeting my authentic self. And I never really saw them as blocks or saw who I actually was not being until I became a mom. And when I was faced with challenges of being a mom and how to handle things and who I wanted to be, really, did I start realizing all the difficulties that I've had and now healing them. So sitting with those uncomfortable things, sitting with the inner child, sitting with the deep thoughts of judgment and fear and abandonment and worthiness, sitting with all those hard things and trying to feel them, understand them, and then love them as a part of myself.
I used to wear my shadows as cloaks of pride. I used to have them be a shell of fuck around and find out, and really made a lot of rigid relationships in my life due to that, with a lot of very catalytic endings. And I explained my shadows to myself when I first started really listening to this side of myself as, parts of myself that I built to protect myself, or as parts of myself that were once created on a soul level to get my energy somewhere. So I kind of view shadows as parts of myself that serve a purpose for some sort of a time. That's why they're there. That's why they were created. But eventually the shoe doesn't fit anymore. And those parts of myself I meant to outgrow. But when I remain within those cycles for longer than necessary, that's when negativity starts being created in those spaces. And that's when certain behaviors start being created that aren't aligned with current or future me, but are aligned with past me that I'm still wearing. And the reason why I called it a cloak was because I was kind of carrying around a lot of past narratives of myself way beyond their expiration date. And they were meant to, really be discarded a long time ago, but I didn't have a strong sense of self. And all I knew of myself was my external actions, and I wasn't proud of those either. And I got to a point where I was so fed up with myself that I really sat there and I stared my shadow in the face and I said, how are we going to work together and get through this before you implode my entire life to a place where I'm so dissatisfied and miserable that I can't see the way out? Because I see a way out currently, but I see how we're heading down a road that's not beneficial. How can we work together? And that's when I befriended my shadow, and I learned that all the aspects of myself that are unlikable or, potentially negative were serving a purpose. And that really gave me some peace of mind while working with that energy.
That's something big that came up for me too when I just started diving into the shadow work is that my ego, I learned, was really there to protect me. And it was protecting me from things that maybe I don't deem now necessary for protection, but it has for so long. So it's like breaking through the walls and the layers and it's one thing after another, and it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And then when you get to that like root, you're like, oh, now I know why I did this for so long, but now I know how to change it, to fix it, to heal it, to move forward in a different way.
The thing that I find about doing shadow work is that for any given shadow that you have or any given topic that you're working on, there's multiple layers of it. So as you're working through these things and as you're healing through them, remember that something that you could have resolved today through this shadow work can manifest in your future self and circle back around, and that's okay. That just means that there's more healing that's necessary. And the thing that I actually found it's something that kind of changed my perspective of shadow work in general, and I'm speaking about layers because of this, is because as I was doing the work, I realized that, and maybe this is something that makes sense to me, and hopefully somebody else listening can really kind of connect with this as well. But there's the parts of shadow that are a masculine shadow and a feminine. And so any given topic that I've healed from, I really always start with the masculine aspects of those things. And then I move into the feminine. And that kind of helps me to gain that balance between the two, right? So let me give you an example of what I mean. A lot of my shadow work started with worthiness. I never found myself worthy of just being myself. This introduces the idea of where shadow comes from, right? And looking back in our lives, a lot of our shadow selves come from our childhood and projected expectations of our upbringing and our cultures and our society. And I'm really grateful to live in Southern California where there is so much diversity and I have so many different types of friends and friend groups where I get to see the way that they work within their family units. But I also get to see, because I'm a person who likes to work in the shadow and help people to relate to themselves and not be afraid of it. I do see the different cultural projections of these shadow selves and where they come from, if that makes sense. For myself, growing up, women are definitely meant to be seen and not heard. We're not of use. Our brains are not of use and they're not of value. Our looks are what get us further in life. And so when I was a teenager, growing up, I, got unfortunately kicked out of my house way too young and then had to really learn who I was as a person and as a young woman. And because the values that my father taught me, which is, I just want to give a little bit of a warning here. It's kind of crude, but my father used to tell me the bigger boobs you have, the further you'll get in life. And that was his value. And that's what he projected on me. So then I learned that my body was of my value. That's how I brought value into my relationships. And so I really didn't learn to respect myself or have self-worth because of those things. So I found myself when I entered in relationships, like romantic relationships, I was a highly sexual person. And it's because I thought that that's what my value was. And I oftentimes would devalue my own intelligence. And I found myself changing the way I spoke around men, or I found myself learning the things that they liked rather than coming to the table with things that I liked. Or, you know what I mean? It was always about the other person in the relationship and not me. And so the way that I had to work through that shadow is I had to confront a lot of things and a lot of values that my father projected upon me, because that was like what he was taught as well, right? So we learn compassion through these things. We learn compassion for self and those that have taught us those things because they never knew any different. I wish that my father knew the true value of a woman, and it makes me think of like his relationship to his mother and like his grandmother and what that meant. So I go further back, like within layers, right? And so because I'm the one working on these things, I now have to teach my daughter the value of her brain, and I have to teach her the value of herself as a person and not her body. And that's a hard balance to have, because as women, there's so many things we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be kind, pretty, smart. Now, and with the progression of the times, now we are able to kind of be more, we have equal play, right? And so, but all while maintaining these societal expectations of us, right? So the things that I've had to work through with that is, and worthiness is, I'm at peace, like, with myself. I am who I am and as I come, and that is enough. And that took a lot of years and a lot of shadow work to actually kind of really believe that, to really believe, like, I had to convince myself of that. And it was a lot of unlearning and relearning how to present myself in the world. And what I've come to the conclusion of is that there is no singular box that I could check. There is nothing about me that you could put into a box, because I am ever changing and ever flowing, and I'm constantly evolving, even past my own expectations. So Ash and Nicole talked about her shadow being blocks, and Ash talked about them being cloaks. And those are two very incredibly valuable perceptions of what your shadows are. Do you guys feel comfortable about talking about maybe a shadow, like how shadow formed within your childhood?
I think if I were to say anything, I would feel that like abandonment, where sometimes it would be like held over me. If I didn't do what somebody wanted of me, then I would lose everything. Like everything would be taken away from me. So I was kind of, and it's something I still kind of deal with. I'm a stay-at-home mom, so like my husband, he provides for us, and so there's always that like that thought of, well, if he were to leave me today, I don't know. I mean, obviously I'd get a job and everything, but it it's that whole like everything would be gone.
Yeah.
The way my whole life is, everything I've known. Um, so I think if there was anything that I'm comfortable talking about, it would be that abandonment. And that also brings in the worthiness that you talked about, Brittany, like how do I define my worth, and then making those decisions to keep somebody around that may not necessarily be in my best interest. So that definitely plays a role. I do have some similar experiences as well with that.
I'm in the same boat as you, because I'm a stay-at-home mom, and right now I don't contribute to our financial well-being at all, or our finances at all. And that is definitely something that I plan on changing in the future. But as of right now, I definitely do still have that fear of, like, I do have to walk a fine line so that he doesn't leave me. So the thing that I've actually really am fortunate of is that I have a partner that is somebody who loves me unconditionally and would never do that to me. And I am so fortunate to have that. And I hope that people can also find that as well. But I look at it, because I've been through a lot of abandonment, right? And now what I find myself doing, um, is I abandon people before they have the chance to do it to me. And that's something that's super hard to work through. And that comes from trying to protect myself.
One thing I am comfortable talking about is the way I've abandoned myself. And I think that healthily, you will kind of abandon identities of self in shadow work. And
Yeah.
unhealthily, will abandon aspects of self in shadow work. So I wanted to kind of bring that up on the topic of abandonment in a space that I'm comfortable with sharing to the listeners, is that you will shift identities so many times while working through healing and utilizing shadow work for yourself. I will share an identity that I had of being like a pothead, like a fun little stoner lady that was fun at parties, like the light of everyone's like joke. I was the jokester, I was the light of the party, all of that stuff. And once I became sober, which was a huge part of my shadow work, I had that identity was gone. I no longer had that aspect of self. And essentially that aspect of me, it felt like I I abandoned it in a way, as I shifted my identity away from that. And it really propelled me into shadow work of like healing me, abandoning myself, not out of like self-preservation or out of fear, but out of growth and out of moving forward, like really leaving those shadow aspects behind in the sense of the way that my ego wants to identify itself. So when it comes to like utilizing shadow work in the sense of, as I shared at the beginning, my cloaks, my identity, my pride factors. When I worked through those and essentially those got stripped away, I was left with a clean slate that I had so much fear about creating in because it had no programming associated with it. Because a lot of shadow work is deprogramming a lot of like parental projections they've put on us of how to like feel about self, and deprogramming a lot of societal programs of, you know, how they want us to feel about self. And there's shadows that are built in that of perception of self and how to feel and how to walk and how to talk and how to look. And then you find yourself in the middle of just this whirlwind of energy that you try to pull identity from. And a lot of our identity is based in shadows. And then when we work in those shadows and we release those, what we are left with is creation. And that's alchemy. And I think that's beautiful.
That is beautiful. It's funny that you talk about like the shifting of identity of self because it's something that I go through like on a daily basis. It's something that I'm constantly like I could wake up in the morning, I'm like, okay, I'm feeling like this is who I am. And then in the middle of the day, I'm like, who was that person that I talked to this morning? Because that's not me anymore. And then I've thought about this a lot too, with like the roles that were assigned, right? Like you're a mom, you're a wife, you're a teacher, you're a daughter, you're a sister, you know, like how much just one word can define you. And then breaking out of that mold, like, no, I'm not just a mom. Like, so who am I? You know, like a lot of times when people say, well, what do you do for a living? Well, uh, I'm a stay-at-home mom. For so long it hasn't felt like that's enough of an answer. And there's so much more to it. Like, I'm not just a mom. This is who I am. This is what I like. This is what I don't like. This is what we do. This is what I don't do. And this is my contribution to myself, to my household, to my spouse, to my son, even further out to my friends. Um, so like there's also like that ripple, like as you start defining yourself and breaking through the aspects and loving the aspects that you once didn't love, everything changes. Your relationships change, how you interact in those relationships, how you receive those relationships. For so long, I don't think I was really receiving the love that my husband gives me. Like, he cares, he loves me. And now that I'm finally starting to accept it, it's completely changed our relationship.
You mentioned when you were talking, Nicole, I was thinking of, even our first episode and kind of building up to the episode where we had to introduce ourselves on this podcast. And it was so hard to do because it's like being a mom, there's so many different hats you have to wear. And being a wife, there's so many different hats to wear, and being a partner. And you're constantly chasing this idea of proving who you are to others around you. And it's like all while trying to find your own self-identity within that, and that's so hard to do. So it's quite literally shadow work. It's like dropping all identities and just getting back to self and who self is and how you identify that, not anybody else around you. And then being comfortable within that and understanding that the way that you show up is enough for everybody and then some, because you are of value. It's inherent within you. You are born with value because you're born on this earth. There is no separation of anything unless you will allow it to be that way, right? So we oftentimes hear like, oh, like I've heard working moms, and I've had judgments. I'll be honest, I've judged working moms, like, why aren't you with your child at home? Like, how could you let somebody else raise your kids? Or, I've had really negative thoughts towards working moms. And then I realized that's a reflection of myself. That's a shadow that I have to work on, because I do want to be a working mom. I do want to be a working mom, and I want to be comfortable in a working environment, and understanding that like that is of equal value, it's the same value as being a stay-at-home mom. And I know working moms who judge me for being a stay-at-home mom, where they're like, well, what did you do all day? I literally kept people alive the same way that you did. You went and you provided financially, I provided the home. It's like, so it's really interesting how this community that we live in is so judgmental of everybody and everything that you do. And it is really hard to kind of bring yourself back to center and understand who you are when you rip away all of these labels, right? And that's the beauty in working in the shadow, because you really get to know yourself and who you are. And you not only get to know yourself and who you are, but you get to love yourself, those parts that you've deemed unlovable. And so it's incredible work, and it is extremely hard. And I really do suggest, if you go into this type of work, please, if you take any advice from any of us, consider therapy, because it does help and it does go hand in hand. It truly, truly does. We can only do so much work in the spiritual. There needs to be work in our physical as well. And so, you can go and talk to an actual therapist. I've found that in my new health journey, working out it's such a helpful way to incorporate therapy into my physical body in whatever way that you can find it. It all works in conjunction with itself. So don't limit yourself, and just keep trying. If you find yourself stuck, try a different way. Talk to 10 therapists, find one trainer, do anything just to keep the progression of self and knowing yourself and loving and accepting yourself. Keep yourself on track with that.
I think that's a good thing to know, is that like support during the shadow is important. Whatever support that is, I'm willing to. I'm in therapy. I mean, my therapist talk about how I opened Pandora's box of shadows and had a hard time working through it myself, which is totally okay. And you don't need to open Pandora's box either. There's so many ways that you can be triggered throughout your day that you don't even need to look in the box yet, So I would say like that's definitely where I started. I was so triggered throughout my day. I had the nickname of Bulldozer growing up because I was just running around angry and wild and irritated by everything because I was so triggered by everything. And I had no idea why until I started shadow work. And my shadow like represented itself to me as like an external thing at first too, which I do want to know. It was kind of like this, for those of you who are familiar with like light bodies, it was like this extra energy in my light body that was just so dense and mucky that made up of all my shadows. And I was able to kind of pick through that. For some reason, I'm supposed to mention Cerberus, the three-headed dog, right now. I had it noted. My guides keep talking about it. That energy helped me a lot through my shadow work. So I'll just kind of mention like, this is random in the middle of the podcast, but there's beings that can help you through shadow work. And Cerberus, I'm really comfortable with animals. I'm really comfortable with dogs specifically. I let down my walls easily with them. They feel very unconditional loving to me. And Cerberus would kind of stand and protect my energy while I was literally breaking down, disintegrating emotionally, essentially, while I was working through some really tough things. And a therapist can be your Cerberus. The Stairmaster can be your Cerberus. Whatever the energy is that provides you a space, a cocoon to be in and feel, that's what's important.
For me, it's definitely writing. I enjoy writing, getting it out in a way that feels purposeful. Sometimes it's just kind of like dumping, just letting anything and everything out without judgment of what I'm writing, because who's gonna see it? And if they see it, oh well, I'm going through it. It's for me, not for you. Yeah, yeah, writing is kind of my therapy.
We know what mine was, right? The demons. Yeah, it's not shocking at all. I've worked with a few different demons on this type of thing, and they help to assist in specific things. So Lucifer really taught me how to love myself unconditionally, unconditional love. There's another demon that I work with. I literally say he's my backbone. If Lucifer's my heart, this demon is my backbone. And he's definitely the one that taught me to stand up for myself and face not just myself, but others around me who needed those boundaries put in place, and put them in place hard. And so you can definitely work with the energies around you. You can, oh my gosh, there's this concept of you being your own ancestor, right? Which blows my mind. But you can call your ancestors in, and who else to better work in the shadow than energies that have lived a human life, right? Because there is a little bit, I don't want to say there's a disconnect with divinity, but there is, because they don't necessarily have the, they don't necessarily have, they have a concept of how we are as humans, but they haven't, it's not a lived experience for them. And so there can be a disconnect with those types of things. So calling in your ancestors for shadow work is huge, so huge. But yeah, I really like Cerberus coming in to help you kind of guide you through the shadows. I'm also currently working with a couple different pantheons. And one of the things I'm working on is worthiness of success. And I'm actually working on that with Hades, which is kind of cool. And he's, of a different pantheon. So it's getting really interesting. It's really cool. So just be open to receiving different forms of shadow work and how you can work on those things. And I kind of want to ask you guys, because we talk about the shadow being like a projection of society around us. Is there any way that you could think of how our society keeps us from facing or embracing this darker side of self, or how we're disconnected from our more authentic self? Like, how does that work within our society? What does that look like to you guys? Can you think of ways that that this could be happening within our day-to-day lives?
I think anything you use to disconnect and numb yourself is case in point for me when I spoke earlier about how my substance use was like a huge shadow blocker for me. And then once I got rid of that, there was like not a lot there. I think that your phone can distract you a lot and really keep you externally focused. You know, certain substances, the autopilot that so many people are on just to survive and go through the day. Shadow work is something that, yes, you can be triggered throughout your day, but you can also sit and journal and meditate with. And some people don't even have time to sit and journal and meditate because they're so busy trying to survive and provide. They don't have that time. So they're going around being triggered and they're not even able to have those moments of mindfulness to build that connection. So I think the way our society is built is very much a rat race that keeps us so externally focused that those internal moments are hard to come by for many people. And the first step's really trying to like build that those moments with you and yourself, and saying like, whoa, wait, I was really triggered there, I reacted how I reacted, I'm forgiving myself for that, but when I go forward, like, how can I really regulate during those times? What's the root cause of this dysregulation? Why am I acting this way? It's kind of like questioning self, not just letting self react. It's really like internal introspection, and allowing yourself to be empowered in those spaces and not guilted and shameful in those times and spaces.
I will say, just to add on real quickly with what you were saying, Ash, two things. One is that there's so much information out there and it gets overloaded that then it's like information overload. You don't know which way to go, where to start, why to start, what to do with what you know. And that becomes extremely difficult. So, I think one of the things with our society is that they haven't taught us how to do any of these things. And with that, and I've talked to you about this before, Ash, is like we're that in between generation. There's our parent generation who none of this mattered. Like it didn't matter. It wasn't a thing, and that's just the way it was. Everything was the way it was. No questions asked.
Mhm.
And now we're healing, and we're healing not only for our generation, but the ones that have come before and the ones that are coming after. And it makes it really hard to be in this time where there's so much information available and you don't always have the time to sift through because we're still in the previous generation of like, go, 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 go. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Everything is about what you're doing and what you're putting out there instead of like, well, who am I? I could put that out there. What do I do for that? So I think that those are my two little like add-ons, is that there's information overload and then we're the in-between generation for bringing in the future. of already healed beings, or teaching them how to heal.
I think the important thing that you said, Nicole, was like we're this in between generation, and our generation is literally laying the foundation as individuals in society rather than everybody kind of being the same type of person, which is what I'll contribute to this. I think the way society really keeps us from working on shadow is the comparison that everybody has to each other. If you look at social media, if you look at like the different as a mom, like the different parenting styles and the judgments that come along with that, it's like everybody has an opinion and they all want to compare and project their ways of life onto others without a second thought. And I think that's something that's very like common within our society, and it's really sad that where we speak of living in communities, but that's quite the opposite of what we are in how we work, because part of community is acceptance, right? And if we're not accepting that there's multiple ways to raise a child or exist in this world, whatever it may be for you, it's all the same lived experience. And what's the point of that? There's no room for evolution of the human species. So comparison to me is the thing that keeps coming back, where and I'm still guilty of it. Like I still have self-doubt and self-worth issues because of comparison, how I compare myself to others. And I work hard to kind of be an individual in my community. And I think it's very hard for others to accept as well. Like I'm often looked at as, I like to deem myself the witch on the corner. I'll take that. But I don't know, like I find it funny that within my small neighborhood community, people are all very kind to each other if you go with what the other is thinking, or if you follow the thoughts of others. But when you have an individualized thought or opinion, you're now like, I don't know, you're kind of like the outcast. And I really hate that. But the thing that I love about that is that I'm living my life authentically, right? And I'm okay with that. Like I'm okay with maybe not knowing my neighbors as well as the other ones. I'm totally okay with that. Or maybe not everybody needs to understand my level of kindness, because at the core of it, I'm an extremely kind and giving and generous person, and maybe not everybody needs to know that about me. So those are kinds of ways that I work to step outside of the societal expectations, is just kind of understanding myself as a person and what I bring to the table, and allowing the ones that are not worthy of my energy, but the ones who are willing to accept myself as I show up, and letting those people in my life and loving those people even more because I see them and they see me.
I think that's such an important aspect of shadow work, Brittany, that you mentioned, is that it's important to love yourself as you show up as well. You can love others, love yourself. You are allowed to be triggered. That's the point of this energy, right? Your triggers are your voice. Your triggers are a sign. They're a symbol to look inward, to see why. And if we enter those spaces of, why am I triggered? I shouldn't be triggered with this. Why am I like this? If it goes in with judgment and shame, it's going to create an uncomfortable space for you to have a magnifying glass. If you enter those spaces with, this is interesting, why is that occurring here? Or how can I help myself through this better? Allowing that being the intention can really allow shadow work to not seem as daunting, to allow it to really be a time to introspect with love. And, they always say to never try and base change on others for self, right? Like if you want to change something, never change it because of other people. So make sure these triggers are something that you actually want to change. If you like being assertive energy that is very vocal and tells people off, vibe with that. But if at the end of the day you sit and you're guilty about that, why are you telling people off in the first place? It's really about building this identity for self of one that you feel aligned and proud in. And that's going to be different for everybody. My shadow is not going to be the same as your shadow. You may have a energy that's very activated in you that I have a shadow in. That's not a shadow for you.
One of the things that just made me think about was how I started my shadow work. Manifestation, oddly enough. I started really thinking about who I want to be. what kind of person do I want to be? And not just like what what am I doing with my life, but am I kind? Am I patient? Am I fun? What do I find joy in? And once I started determining who I want to be, I was able to see how I'm not that way and dive a little bit deeper and start asking myself questions to be able to get to that point.
I love that you bring that up because I was very like the beginning of my spiritual journey was shadow work. Like I headed right into it. I didn't even know what it was until like halfway through someone gave me a name for it. They're like, "Why are you really doing a lot of shadow work?" I was like, "What is that?" So before I was just really based in self-improvement and just so fed up that I was halfway through it before I even knew what it was. And that's going to be the case for some of you, and some of you it's going to be a lot more intentional on that. But shadow work is also something that can stop and can go. I wasn't in shadow work this whole entire time. I had a lot of time of really accepting my light and my amazingness after really being in the shadows of myself for so long. And when Nicole brought up, that vision and the manifestation of self and future self, that brought me into a current shadow that I'm in of me visually seeing my future self as something vastly different than how I currently am. And then her providing me stepping stones of how I got there. And it was getting back into shadow work and really improving the way that I'm treating myself physically with diet and exercise and things of that sort. That's a big part of my current journey. So a big part of shadow work is going to be coming up for breath, coming up for air. It's not going to be a choo-choo train to Shadow Town forever. You really should be coming up to enjoy the fruits of your labor at some points.
So our affirmation for today is I embrace all parts of myself, even those difficult to love. And with that, to do some journal work, what do you find difficult to love? Why do you find difficult to love it? And how can you start to love it? What are ways you can show yourself love?
Love that.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode and expanding within conscious conversations. We now close this sacred space with love and gratitude. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay connected.